Hi guys, my name is Izzy and I'm a senior. I'm in the honors college, and so every semester I have to take an honors course, but they don't have honors courses really available for upper level, especially finance emphasis majors. And so what I do is that I turn a regular course into an honors course, and I do that by choosing a topic, and then with that topic, I have to write a paper about it and then create a presentation. And so the class I chose was Finance 4510, and the topic I chose was sales comparison. And so what I did is that I wanted to create a sales comparison, kind of how to for beginners or for, the average person. And so what we've been learning, it's from the point of view of an appraiser, but I wanted to create kind of a beginner how to for just like the average person who is maybe curious about how to go about and making an evaluation for their house. So let's get started. Yeah. So, like I said, I'm going to be doing this from the point of view that you guys know nothing about sales comparison. And I promise to keep this presentation short and sweet. So, why might you want to perform a valuation for your residential property? Well, there are several different reasons. So, the first one is refinancing a loan, but with this kind of a valuation, it would be done by an appraiser. So, why would you want to do it yourself? Well, maybe you're planning to sell your house, and you want to have some idea of maybe how much you could get for that house before you make that decision. Or maybe you're just curious. Maybe you've had your house for, 20 years and you just want to know how much it would be worth now. So there are several different approaches to valuation. The one that we're going to talk about, sales comparison, but the other two are income capitalization and then the cost approach. So the income capitalization, this is what you would use for income producing properties. So this is what you would use for, a building that could be used for like a boutique or like a nail salon. And then the next one is cost approach. And you kind of use this one for unique properties where maybe you don't have enough information to be able to do the sales comparison approach or the income capitalization approach. So, as we're doing our valuation, an appraiser would use two types of data, quantitative and qualitative. We're just going to use qualitative because quantitative, this would require skills and knowledge and information that the average person, either they don't know how to do the kind of math or they don't have the ability to get their hands on the kind of information that would be required for a quantitative analysis. So we're going to focus on qualitative. And so there are four major steps for in the sales comparison valuation process. So the first one is you're going to find comparable sales or comparable properties. The second one is you're going to add the information from these comparable properties and your property, also known as the subject property, into a data grid. And I will show you guys a data grid a little bit later. And then you're going to perform an analysis to determine the differences between the comparable properties and your property. And then you're going to determine the effects of those differences. And then lastly, you're going to use your analysis to determine a price bracket for your property. So let's break this down a little bit more. So when you're finding comparable properties, you can use multiple listing services such as realtor.com. I did an example that I will be showing you guys later, and I use realtor.com to find my listings. And then you can also check with your county. Some counties will make public sale information, so you could get really good information from these websites, the sale prices, when they last were sold, and some other physical characteristic information for these properties. And then when you're choosing these comparable properties, you want to find ones that are as close to your property, your subject property, as possible. Because later on, when we're making adjustments, the more adjustments that we have to make, the greater the chance that our price bracket or our value bracket will be a little bit off. Okay, so now that you've found your comparable sales, your comparable properties, you're going to add that information into a data grid. And this is some examples of what exactly information you want to include. But then here is also my example data grid that I will explain a little bit more in depth later. But across the top, I have my subject property, and then I have my comparable properties. And, so you can see down the side, I have my address, listing price, and just kind of basic information about the house. You want to go ahead and fill that all in. And then we will start making adjustments. And so here, and then after you fill all of that in and you've made all your adjustments, we will explain the adjustments a little bit more later. Then you're going to do a reconciliation. So you're going to develop your price bracket or your value bracket by determining which properties are inferior and which properties are superior to your property. And then you're going to rank these inferior and superior properties by their price, but also by how close they are to your property. And then you're going to bracket the value of your property between the highest valued inferior property and the lowest valued superior property. So your property would fall in right here, which that sounds a little confusing. I'll explain it a little bit more in depth when I go through my own example. But after that, you're done. It's not a super long process. It's not a super hard process, but that's because we have made a lot of assumptions in our process and we've skipped some step in our process. And some steps that we skipped are some of the adjustments. So let me break down all of the adjustments that we would have made or that we will make. So the first adjustment is the real property rights. So this is one of them where we will be making an assumption, or if you want, you can just completely leave it out. But one of the first things that an appraiser learns is that the value of a property isn't the value of the property isn't because of the property itself, it's with the bundle of rights that come with that property. And so what we will be assuming is that all of our comparable properties are fee simple properties. Since these are all residential properties, it's a good chance that we will be correct with that assumption. And then our next four adjustments are financing terms, conditions of sale, expenditures made immediately after the purchase, and market conditions. It is possible to skip all of these adjustments. And how you would do that is that instead of using actual sale prices from, houses that have already been sold, what you're going to use instead is listing prices. And so that's what I did with my example that we'll get to. But if you do use sale prices, then the financing terms will be such as the interest rates for the sale, and then, was it an all cash sale? Was mortgage used? And so those kind of characteristics. And then conditions of the sale. So what you're looking at with conditions of the sale was the transaction an arm's length transaction, which that just means that the buyer and the seller had no undue influence on each other. An example of a transaction that would not be arm's length would be a grandparent selling a house to a grandchild. There's a good chance that the grandparent is giving the grandchild a deal. And so that selling price wouldn't be accurate because the price would reduce because of that familial connection. And then the next one would be expenditures made immediately after the purchase. And so what this would be was that, say that I just bought a house, but before I actually signed the contract and everything, I learned that the roof needed to be replaced. And so what I did was that I went back to the seller and I told them that the roof needs replaced, so they deducted the price of the house, and then I just paid for the roof later. And so that selling price would also not be accurate because it was reduced because of the expenditure that I had to make immediately after I bought this house. I had to buy a whole nother roof. And then lastly is market conditions. And so this would be so a comparable property that was sold a year ago, maybe the real estate market was super slow then. It was hard to sell houses, and so they probably sold at a lower price than, say, they would right now, where the real estate market is booming. Houses are being sold left and right, and so the houses are higher. The sale prices are higher than they were a year ago. So you have to make an adjustment for these changes in the real estate market between, a slow real estate market and a booming real estate market. So the next two adjustments are really the biggies with what we're doing. They're definitely more qualitative heavy than some of the other adjustments are. And so the first one is location. This is pretty explanatory. Say, I'm a parent, I have 3 kids. I'm going to value a house higher that is in a cul-de-sac than I would a house that is right off of a major highway, because that house, it's off of the highway, it's not as safe. It could be louder because of all of the cars. And so I would give that house a lower value, or I wouldn't pay as much for that house. And then the next one is physical characteristics. So this is when you really break down what separates the houses. How many bathrooms does it have? How many cars can the garage fit? Is it 2 levels, 1 level? Does it have a big backyard? Does it have a deck? All of those kind of characteristics. And then the next three, they also don't really apply as much. So we have economic characteristics. These really apply for income producing properties. And then we have legal characteristics, which we are comparing, all residential houses. And so they're most likely going to have all of the same zoning. So legal characteristics really isn't going to be an issue either. And then the last one is non-realty components of value. And this is when it gets into personal property. So say that I sold my house and I sold it with all of the furniture, which means that my price was higher than just the value of the house itself because I included all of the furniture. But say you're about to sell your house, you want to use my house as a comparable property, you're going to have to adjust my sale price because you're not selling yours with furniture and I did. So my sale price would be too high for your house because you're not having furniture in it. So those are the adjustments that we would be making. They're not too difficult. So now we're going to get into my example. So like I said before, I got these listings off of realtor.com. I chose 5 of them. I made one of them my subject property. So that's my property. And then I have 4 comparables. And so as you see, I have the addresses, I have the listing prices, and then I have location. So this is when you start making your qualitative adjustments. And so comparable property 1 and 2, I have as similar to the location of my subject property. All 3 of them are back in cul-de-sacs, so they're very ideal. But then comparable properties 3 and 4, they are farther out of town than the first 3. And so I consider that as being inferior. And then comparable property 3, it was located on a busy residential street. And so, it could be louder, it could not be as safe as the streets back in the cul-de-sac. And then comparable property number 4, I also considered inferior because with sales comparison, a lot of it can be very subjective. And so this decision is a subjective one for me because comparable property number 4 is located on a corner. And so one street here is a busy residential street, and then you have, it's cul-de-sac street. And so I consider being on the corner inferior because you don't have as much privacy. Other people might consider it superior. It just depends on what your preferences are and what you think buyer preferences are. And so as you can see from the square footage of the lot, like I said, comparable properties 3 and 4 are farther out of town than the other ones. And so they do have a larger lot than the first 2 comparables and then the subject property does. And then we get down to condition. So this is another one of the adjustments that I made. So my subject property has a very average condition. It's not super spectacular, but it has been updated recently. Comparable property number 1 was by far the superior superior interior. It had completely redone kitchen, completely redone bathrooms, all new appliances. It was a very great listing. Then we have comparable property 2, where it was pretty similar to my subject property. It was probably done around the same time. They had the same stuff redone when they were redone. And then we get to comparable properties 3 and 4, which were by far inferior to my subject property. They haven't been updated. And so they had some older appliances, some outdated appearances. And so they were just inferior than my subject property. And then for school districts, this is actually a pretty big consideration for residential properties. And so all of my comparable properties had the same school were in the same school district from elementary up to high school. My subject property did have, it was in a different elementary district, but the elementary school for my subject property was rated just as highly as elementary school for the comparable properties. So I felt fine saying that they were all similar across the board. And then, like I said before, for our real property rights, we're making the assumption that they're all fee simple. And so then you get down to my net adjustment. So this is when I go through and I decide, is comparable property number one superior or inferior to my subject property? I decided it was superior. I decided comparable property number two was superior, but then comparable properties three and four, I decided they were inferior compared to my subject property just because they were farther out of town, they weren't as nice, they're older. And then after I decided their net adjustments, then I went through and I ranked them. So comparable property one was by far the best property, and it's also the most expensive. It gets ranking number one. Comparable property number two was still superior, and it gets ranking number two. And then comparable properties three and four, I felt comparable property three was better than comparable property number four. So I ranked those three and four. And then, as I tried to explain a little bit earlier, my subject property, well, the price bracket will be between comparable properties two and three, because that's when I get the adjustment from superior to inferior property. And so my price bracket will be between $239,900 and $259,000. And yes, this is quite big of an gap between those two. But because we didn't go through all of the adjustments, because we didn't perform any quantitative adjustments, we really can't get much closer with our estimation because we didn't have all of that information because we made so many assumptions. This having that wide gap gives us a better chance of being accurate with what my subject property's listing price actually could end up being. So I hope you guys enjoyed my presentation. I hope you guys learned something, and I hope you guys now have the abilities and the confidence to be able to perform your own sales comparison analysis. Thank you guys.